It's my pleasure to welcome to today's webinar Capire Consulting's principal and co-founder, Amy Hubbard. Capire Consulting is based in Australia, and Amy is, within that country, one of Victoria's most recognized stakeholders and community engagement specialists. She's worked extensively with state and local governments on significant infrastructure, urban renewal, and public policy projects in Australia and overseas. She delivers community engagement training, she undertakes formal evaluations, and she's highly regarded as a facilitator. She's primarily recognized for her capacity to effectively engage hard-to-reach groups. Welcome, Amy. Thank you for making time to be with all of us today.
Good morning. It's 6 a.m. in Melbourne, Australia. So I just wanted to preface anything I say by, just emphasizing that it's quite early in the morning here and no caffeine has hit my body as yet. So we'll see how we go.
Oh, that makes me sad.
We'll get through it together.
Oh, good. Well, that makes your commitment to do this with us even more special, I have to say, as a fellow coffee lover. So maybe we can kick it off by asking you to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this work of socially inclusive engagement, and a little bit more also about maybe Capire Consulting Group and how it came to be.
Yeah, okay. So as you know, my name is Amy Hubbard. I need to also preface this conversation today with that I'm the mother of 3 small boys who I really hope stay asleep for the duration of this webinar. So if they find me, it will be well and truly an inclusive webinar because you may have a 1-year-old, 5-year-old and 7-year-old with us. I'm the wife of a gentleman called Crispin Buttress, who is a director and founder of Bang the Table, who some of you know. I think they're based in America and in Australia. I'm a director and founder of a community engagement professional association called Engage to Act. And if you don't know who Engage to Act is, you should check them out. I'm a director and founder of Capire, and I'm also a community engagement generalist with a passion for social inclusion. Also, you'll note on my slide that I'm a Gemini and I am an ENFJ in Myers-Briggs personality types, which, to note, is by far the most popular personality type for community engagement professionals, because I often test my colleagues and friends. I'm also a runner. I love running and I love traveling. So just a little bit more, I originally trained as an urban planner. And because, you know, urban planning is one of the only disciplines in Australia where it's legislated to actually undertake engagement around decision making and change. And it became very clear early on that good decisions about communities could only be made with all the community's voices in the room, because they're the experts of the community. They understand how it operates, what their values are, what their aspirations are. And it really struck me as absurd that planners would quite often sit in an office administering a planning scheme, making long-term decisions about communities they knew nothing about. They were almost scared of the community. Maybe it was too much time, maybe too many resources, but they wouldn't actually go and listen to the community and where they wanted to head and what direction they wanted to go in. So in a few short years, I moved from working in urban planning to community development to purely community engagement. And I've now worked in community engagement for over 20 years. And all of that time I've been a consultant. So I've literally worked on thousands of community engagement projects. I've worked a lot in Australia, every state and territory. I've worked and lived in Vietnam, and I've worked in Fiji and Sri Lanka. We have a great client in Malaysia called Think City, and I've worked in Bangladesh as well. So I do travel around with my work, and you know, I really love and feel very passionate about what I do. So in terms of where Capire came about, if we can just move on to the next slide. So 11 years ago, I set up Capire with my co-founder, Chris Robinson. And Capire's vision is giving every person a voice. So that's what we aim to do. What sets Capire apart from other consultants in this space is that our team all have technical skills. No one is from a communications or public relations or a media background. We're not about selling, telling, or yelling. We all have a deep understanding of policy programs and impact, which enables us to work closely with all stakeholders. So we're great listeners, but we're also great problem solvers. Just a final note there, Capire is a very proud B Corp, which is an international business accreditation for high levels of positive social and environmental impact. Late last year, we were awarded Best in the World awards for the work that we do. And what we've been able to achieve with a focus on engaging vulnerable communities and the positive legacy we've been able to create through ongoing community engagement. So we're very passionate about the social impact our community engagement can achieve. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and a little bit about Capire.
Well, that is both daunting and inspiring. I can't wait to get into the meaty bits of learning more about your approach. And I have to laugh because when you were talking about ENFJ, I can attest that I too am an ENFJ. So you can add me to that confirmation list of a lot of people working in this space, having that personality type. So can you tell us a little bit about how you at Capire define socially inclusive engagement and what some of the most significant benefits and also challenges are to really kind of making a commitment to it?
Yeah, okay. So just to emphasize, inclusive engagement is Capire's business as usual approach. You know, this is something that we do on every project, every day. It's a philosophy. Because if engagement is not inclusive, really, what's the point? You know, why are we doing it? Why are some voices more important than others? Why should decision makers only hear from the loudest or the most powerful voices? You know, it really comes to the heart of why we do engagement. So we define inclusive engagement as providing people with opportunities to participate by reducing barriers, creating connections, and engaging in meaningful and supportive ways. So when looking at the definition, I think the key word there is barriers. All communities have assets. I've worked in community development. Every community has assets, and we like to celebrate those and link in with those and support those assets when we can. But everyone has barriers. And once barriers are identified and understood, you can design engagement processes that are inclusive. As I said, everyone has barriers. You and I, Sylvia, we both have barriers, but the more vulnerable you are, the more barriers you have, and therefore the more difficult you are to engage as there are more barriers to overcome. Our philosophy to inclusive engagement looks to address the barriers between the person or persons doing the engagement, and you'll see on that slide there, so there's a practitioner in the middle, and the individuals and groups they are trying to connect to. So they're the individuals and groups on the right side of the slide. We have a toolkit which is available on our website, capire.com.au, and it's about overcoming, first of all, identifying and understanding, but then overcoming those barriers between you doing the engagement and the community or communities that you're working with. But I need to just note that quite often there are barriers within your organisation to engagement that can't be overcome. You know, there are many times when it's been go out and engage as a community tomorrow and finish the next day and see what you come up with. Or there are political reasons in the organisation where you can't speak to some groups. So what we try and do is overcome the barriers with the community, but barriers such as location, funding, structure, timing, political imperatives of your project, we can't overcome that because they sit within your organisation. So that's just a little bit about our approach there. So if you go on to the next, slide. Some of the typical barriers which we see, and these are all in our toolkit, are associated to personal resources, motivation and attitude, and cultural factors. And as I said before, the more vulnerable you are in a community, the more barriers that you have. You know, for me, being a mum of three and a director for a couple of organisations, really my barrier to engagement, the main one, is limited time. So that's a barrier organisations would have to overcome to get to me. So the engagement has to be at a time that I can attend. It has to be convenient. It has to be high impact and meaningful as well. I suppose that's just because of who I am. So they're kind of the broad barriers that we've come up with. The toolkit was originally published in 2013, and over time, when I deliver training around this, when I spend a whole day or days with a group of people, we test these. This is really a starting point to get people and prompt people to think about, well, what are the barriers in my community? So if we move on to the next slide, again, these are some hard to reach groups that may have more than one barrier, and they're different in every community. So, you know, those that are hard to reach in rural areas will be very different to those that are hard to reach in different urban areas. So some of the more obvious hard to reach, which may be hard to reach in North America, might be homeless people, or maybe not. Maybe they're linked in with community services, not sure. Fathers or mothers, they can be hard to reach because they're busy people like me. Like you, perhaps, Sylvia, and other people on the line. Newly arrived people are often hard to reach. You know, they're newly arrived people, they've just settled into Australia, they might be linked into community services and some leaders within their community, but in terms of more broader civic participation, they are hard to reach as well. But again, the list in front of you is just a starting point. And you know, when I go out and speak to clients or you know, other people doing our training, they will always identify other people outside of that list there. So, you know, so inclusive engagement really is about, it's about the barriers, understanding barriers and getting around those barriers, creating connections, because that's what the community wants. When I go out and talk to the community about, well, what is engagement, when I'm not talking about a subject matter and I'm talking about engagement, they say, well, we want to connect. We want to connect with government. We want to connect with the people making decisions. We want to connect with other people in our communities, and then engaging in meaningful and supportive ways. And, you know, at the foundation of meaningful and supportive engagement is respect. And again, that comes to the heart of everything that Capire does. And I hope most engagement professionals as well, that respect is fundamental to any sort of engagement, that all people, you treat them with dignity and respect and you listen to them, because that's what engagement's all about.
Well, I find this really helpful. Just a quick question. So when you talk about the barriers, you know, the barriers that I might identify are deeply rooted in my own biases or assumptions, right?
Yeah.
How do you, in your consulting practice, have, through your experience, do you kind of help people move past those, or do you have ways that you found that are effective to helping to surface some of those assumptions that folks hold?
Yeah, so you need to take people through, you know, a process of, you know, understanding who the community is, literally wearing the hat of those different types of community members and understanding what their day-to-day lives might be like. You know, we all have biases. We all make huge generalizations in engagement. People are always around me making huge generalizations, and we need to test that. But we don't just test that as practitioners, we test that with the community as well. So it's really unpacking who these individuals and groups are. But just more on inclusive engagement, it really does seeks out the 99%. And people say, really, only 1% of community members step up and participate? And it's like, well, probably less. You know, if we're working on an engagement process which is city defining in a strategic way in Australia, and the city has 3 million people, we're really excited if 2,000 people actively participate. So inclusive engagement is seeking out the 99%. It identifies the barriers. It uses accessible tools and techniques. So that means tools and techniques that are on the terms of the participant. We'll also have tools and techniques that, you know, we need, you know, things like, you know, design charrettes or workshops that's our language. It's not necessarily the community's language. So you need to go to the community and you need to disguise the engagement. So that's been a real passion of mine of the last few years. Like, how can I disguise this engagement? People have engagement fatigue, or they're just not interested because they're dealing with the day-to-day life, or they're trying to pay their bills or get their kids to school, or integrate into a new community. So if you can disguise the community engagement, you've got a much better chance of getting people into a conversation to understand their needs, aspirations, and their values. So if we move on,
can you give us just one example of how you would disguise your engagement?
Make it fun.
I think that's such a great term. Yeah. Okay.
Just make it fun. So, make it fun. And that can be through, instead of having an information booth where you might ask some questions about community services, make it like a festival. Have food, have some entertainment, use art, like make it fun. And you might need to test what fun is, because fun for one community is very different from another. And people will actually want to step up and into the engagement. They're attracted to the engagement. They're not running away. They're not trying to hide down the street when you've got your tablet out and you're trying to do your survey. They're like, whoa, what's this about? This is really exciting. Of course I want to be part of this conversation.
Oh, beautiful.
So benefits of inclusive engagement, it provides a comprehensive evidence base to inform decisions. And that really comes to the core of engagement. I've had ministers in a room with me saying, but Amy, can't we just have like 1,000 people participate? Doesn't that tick the boxes? Isn't that what the media will want to hear? It's like, well, if we have 1,000 people in the room participating, what about if those 1,000 people were all white, they were all university educated, they were all male, they were all over 60? Wouldn't they all give us the same perspective, or a very similar perspective, and probably a perspective we already know? So I've literally been in a room where we were designing a process for 1,000 people, and the minister of the day wanted the same type of people in the room. And it was like, no, we're going to understand what our community looks like and then find 1,000 people which matches or mirrors in a much smaller scale the community. I think he got it. I think he got it at the end of the day. Other benefits are ideas are promoted through a diversity of voices, really important, and ideas that the decision makers won't have even thought of. Strengthens relationships and sense of belonging. It builds capacity of community to be active citizens, and really that's what we want. If we have active citizens, we have healthier and more sustainable communities. And civic participation and promoting people's democratic right, that's really important as well. And quite often I find that really challenging with some migrant populations or newly arrived people, that they don't want to have a voice. They've come from a place where having a voice has created a lot of trouble for them. So it's really important to empower them and make sure they know that they are safe and they can say something different to the person next to them or the decision maker in the room, and they will be safe. And that's really challenging. And when you do translate community engagement in some languages, I remember a few years ago I was working with two translators, and they were translating into Mandarin and Cantonese with the Chinese community, and both translations were turned engagement into propaganda. So the word when I was using community engagement, they were using the word propaganda to the audience. So we worked that out quite early on, and we worked to resolve it. But that's really challenging as well, because a lot of people don't understand what engagement is all about. So some of the challenges, if we just move to the next slide, in sufficient time and resources. We all know that proper engagement, thorough engagement takes time. I always say, 60% of your time to plan it. So 20% of your time to do it, and 20% of your time to understand what the community have said and make sense of it, and do your reporting and evaluation. So I would double that again if you really want to do the inclusive engagement approach, because you need to understand who the community is. You need to understand those barriers, and then you also need to identify how you're going to overcome them. Other challenges are internal stakeholders understanding. You know, why would you want to go and listen to the views of the homeless people? Why would you want to go and understand the views of the people with a disability? Why would you want to do that? Why don't we just have a workshop and get everyone in the room? Just one workshop, that'll do it. It's like, no, you know, you need to give people safe spaces and time and create those relationships before you can have a meaningful conversation. The third point there is getting stuck on numbers, and that really was alluding to the minister before, where it's like, we just want big numbers of people participating in this dialogue. And it's like, well, what about all the different stakeholder groups? Doesn't matter how many people, it's a matter of having the broadest range of stakeholders in the room to bring the diversity of voices, the diversity of evidence for the decision makers to consider and move forward with. So getting stuck on numbers is a real risk.
So, you know, one of the things that really drew me to looking carefully at a lot of the resources and tools that you folks had created was the recognition that you have developed some real expertise around engaging hard to reach groups. So wondered if you might be able to offer us some advice and examples of how you have more effectively engaged what we would call unusual suspects.
Yeah.
Not the same old, right?
Yes. So sort of my top of brain, top of head, not that it's really working at the moment, 6:25 a.m. My advice is to find the community leaders. So within that 99% of the population, there's leaders. Find the leaders and go and talk to them or give them a call and understand and get an understanding of how they engage with their networks, what works and what doesn't work. That's really important, finding community leaders. Use incentives. And sometimes people think, oh, incentives, you're paying people. And look, sometimes we do pay people, or we pay for childcare, we pay for travel, we always pay for great catering. But incentives can also be about the proposition that you're presenting people to participate in this discussion. So it could be, come and meet your neighbours and have a say about your future. Like, what is it? What is the hook that's going to get people step up and step into a conversation? There always has to be an incentive. And we, you know, with back to homeless people, because housing, I know it is in North America as well, housing and you know, accommodation, whether it's permanent or temporary, is a really big issue in urban communities and regional communities. We pay people, we give them cash for their time, which is, I think, you know, that's, the conversation is deep. We need them for hours. It's more like a focus group type situation, so we give them cash. With different cultural groups, like new cultural groups or established migrant communities in Australia, we'll put on a community lunch. So last week I had a group of people from Timor-Leste in our office. They're actually from Timor-Leste. They were part of a delegation. So we got some East Timorese, like a refugee group, to come in and cook for them and using food. So we had their attention all day. So food is a really good incentive as well. So use existing networks. Don't try and create your own. So the networks can be identified through leaders as well. So in Australia, most local governments will have a community directory which will describe all the different networks, from bicycle networks to religious networks or faith-based networks to cultural networks. Start with those networks and reach out to those groups. Using the right facilitators and venues, and the right facilitators, so for another example, at the moment we're doing a lot of engagement with young people. So we'll be doing a deliberative process with a group of adults that represent the community, but to kind of to feed into the deliberative process, we're doing youth or children, primary school age children for deliberative process, but we're using young facilitators. So whether the facilitators are 10 years old, so they're the right facilitators, 10-year-olds are the right facilitators to work with 10-year-olds, or if they're 15-year-old, like we call them youth here in Australia, we use 15-year-old facilitators. But it's also about the right venue A community hall will only work with some groups. So think about your venues in creating that safe space for opening and sharing. Ask the questions that matter is also really important with engaging hard to reach. You don't go and ask them 20 questions. Ask the 5 questions that really matter. And also acknowledge what you don't know. And you can be a bit vulnerable. I think that's really important as well. So, you know, it's okay to say, look, I haven't worked with a group of people before. How do you like to start your meetings? What acknowledgements do you like to do? Do you like to sing a song? Do you like to share a story? What do you do? And that's okay. You know, it's showing a little bit of vulnerability, I think, is really important in engaging hard to reach groups.
Very
so if we move,
interesting. Yeah.
So I've got some simple examples, and you know, creating temporary spaces or pop-ups. So these are all our projects, photos from our projects. So, you know, as I said before, disguise it, make it fun. Have activities for children, then you'll get the adults in. So you'll see on the top right-hand side, that was engagement at Melbourne's biggest public market. So we had activities for children, and there was food and things going on around that pop-up. But because the children were occupied doing their activity, we could then spend time with the parents or the guardian or the carer and ask them the really strategic questions about the future of the market and the types of services and facilities that they wanted to see in the future. So creating temporary spaces and pop-ups, it's one. So finding your champions, really important, and champions can come in any form. Champions can be part of like a deliberative process, which, you know, Australia at the moment, we are going very much down the deliberative path in a lot of our local government work. So you could have champions out of a deliberative process, it's being legislated. You can have a champions network where you're building the capacity of the community to actually undertake engagement for you or with you, or you can identify champions to link in with different cohorts. So again, we've got some younger champions there as well. And the task that we gave them was to go back to their school and to ask the questions to their school and bring information back to us as part of a broader vision setting for a city here in Victoria. So finding your champions is really important.
Beautiful.
So if we move on, art and craft. So the people that are around the table, they're scientists, and they're actually they're not hard to reach, but they're hard to engage outside of science, as in they'll talk in a way that potentially is not accessible to community members. So this project with the photos at the bottom, that was about deciding how we were going to spend $20 million on biodiversity response planning, but to come up with the process so they could talk, they could kind of relax into it because there were community members there as well. I got them to do craft. So I got them to prototype this process using craft, so it was a co-design process, and then from there they were able to work with the community to design the process together, so to co-create this biodiversity response planning process. But everyone can do craft. It breaks down every barrier that exists between people. Everyone can do craft. Yeah, so art and craft.
Beautiful.
And my final slide there. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead. No, it's just such a lovely way to equalize language and knowledge, right?
Exactly. Making it fun. So I've been doing a lot of work with Lego and using Lego, again, like craft, to break down those barriers. And I like the psychology around Lego as well. What people pick up, what they play with, what attracts them. So some people that won't pick up the Lego, some people will only play with the little people, some people will start building houses straight away. So Lego is great. And again, using a creative technique like Lego, it's that equalizer. It socializes people. It creates a different type of conversation before answering the big questions. The top right-hand corner is our low-tech survey board that we use at Capire. So instead of, you know, having a survey board, a survey on an iPad, we've made a board and we go out to public places and we make it fun. So always think about fun. And not just in terms of the technique, try and be fun yourself, you know, try and, you know, have the smile, have a laugh, you know, even if it's a serious topic, you can still make it more fun than what it could have been in the past, you know. I think that's really important. You're taking people's time. You're distracting them from their day-to-day life. You know, you don't want to make it too heavy for them.
Beautiful. That's great. So one of the things that I was really taken by when I was reviewing your resources and material was the engagement triangle that you folks had articulated, and then kind of how you've used it as, you know, a way to assess which techniques might be the better fit for what you're trying to achieve. Can you maybe walk us through that tool a little bit and how you all use it in your work?
Yeah, sure. And I just wanted to emphasize that all of these resources are on our website. So I'm giving you very high level description of them. So please go in and download them, have a play with them, send me an email if you don't understand them. We've got worksheets too. So I'm going to give you the background to the engagement triangle, because people are like, what is this thing? What are you trying to do? You know, is it different to the IIP2 spectrum and other things that are out there? And yes, it is. It is very different. So the background is I was doing research for local government in Victoria, in my state, in 2013. And for the most of the research that I was doing around community engagement, officers, so the teams at local governments, felt that the definitions around community engagement, or what you would call public participation, were not being used to describe, the definitions that were being used to describe community engagement did not work for them. Because the engagement they were doing was not about decision. But it was still really important work, because it was about connection, it was about a dialogue, it was about, you know, respect and relationships, but it wasn't about a decision. And to give you an example, I met an officer at that time who she really stayed in my mind. So she was doing work around climate change adaptation, and she said, my role feels like engagement as I'm out working with businesses and communities every day. But what I do doesn't sit within the IIP2 spectrum. Does it mean it's not important, that it's not engagement? And, you know, of course, you know, that was one of many conversations where, almost because their engagement wasn't about a decision, it was more from a community development perspective, they almost felt disempowered, because the models that were out there weren't meaningful for them. They couldn't use them, or couldn't use those models to communicate with other people in their organisation about what they were doing. So if we move on in the slides, my research was like, okay, yes, so community engagement or public participation, it's about involving the community in decision making. We get that, we all own that. It's been around for a long time now. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. My next light bulb was, okay, so community engagement, it's about healthy, connective and active communities. It's about social and economic participation, leading to more sustainable communities. It's about our leaders valuing civic participation and local decision making. It was like, whoa, okay, engagement is everything. It's fundamental to what government do. It's not an add-on anymore. It's core to their work. So my final slide there, it's, you know, it's everything. It's everything. And at that time when I was doing the work, it was quite overwhelming. But for it to be everything, I had to come up with a definition that was going to work across government and across everything that they do. So what I came up with is on the next slide, and it does help to have a husband who is also a community engagement practitioner. So I would come home and talk to him about it, and we put together the engagement triangle together. So I just think Capire put copyright on it before Bang the Table did, but we did. I need to do the shout out. People on this call do know Crispin, that we did this together. So
we've had some of your Toronto colleagues, I think, at some of our community engagement events.
Oh, great. Yeah, great. Yeah. So 3 elements. So we've got informing decisions. We know what that's about. But the other 2 elements are building capacity, so to educate the community on a specific theme or issue to increase knowledge or change behaviours. And the third element is strengthening relationships. So to build new relationships and or improve relationships with the community. So they were kind of the building blocks to what engagement was all about within a government setting in Australia. So if we move to the next slide, what I wanted to create was a tool for a conversation, because what I was hearing in government is that one corner would be saying, we're doing engagement, and they were pushing out newsletters and pushing out comms to build a road. You know, there was no negotiables, they weren't doing any listening, but they were calling that engagement. And on the other side, we had people doing climate change adaptation work, calling that engagement. But then other people doing master plans, which had 3 phases of visioning, options, and a final plan, and that was engagement. So what I was hearing was that there was a confusion about this term engagement. So I designed up this tool so you could have a conversation internally to define what your engagement was all about. And you know, in the ideal world, everyone sits in a 10. So the engagement they're doing is kind of a balance between those 3 elements. But on some projects, it's just going to be about relationships. You know, it's just about relationships. So it sits in a 7. And quite often in an urban planning setting, it'll start with a 1. When you're really open, there's lots of negotiables, and over time it might pull down to a 6 or an 8. So it's a tool to have those conversations internally to define the true intent of your engagement. So as I said before, we do have worksheets online to support that, and I've sat in many meetings now, and it's used all over the world, and I hear reports back about it made us, you know, it made us have that really difficult conversation. It really did. And you see people debating whether the engagement sits in a 5 or a 6. You know, they'll sit there and they'll debate about it, because underneath those numbers, the 1 to 10, are recommendations about how you go about the engagement, because engagement for strengthening relationships in terms of inclusive tools and techniques is quite different from the tools and techniques that you'd use for informing decisions. So yeah, so that's the engagement triangle.
Wonderful. And we're just going to move into our last question, but I wanted to sort of put a shout out to those of you on the line. If you've had questions bubbling, if you wouldn't mind starting to type those into the chat box. After we've covered this last question together, we do want to have a chance to have you all put your questions forward for Amy. So the last question we have for you is, you've actually kind of begun to outline 6 very distinct phases around how inclusive engagement unfolds. And I wondered if you could take a little bit of time with us and just sort of speak to those 6 phases a little bit more and kind of animate them a bit.
Yeah, okay. So this again is in our inclusive community engagement toolkit. And this is, you know, this really is, again, coming back to sort of the business as usual approach. So I'm hoping, if you're community engagement practitioners, that it kind of makes sense to you. And if it doesn't, that's okay as well. We'd love to hear why. So defining, I really think the defining is the most critical step in any engagement process, because you really are setting yourself up to succeed or not. And you really need to understand what you're engaging about before you start the engagement. Sounds straightforward enough, but many government departments don't start with all the facts on the table. I find that a lot of government departments will rush into engagement before they understand the true kind of landscape of what's going on. And, you know, there's lots of questions that need to be answered. So what's the history of the project in the community? What's the aim of the project? What's the aim of the engagement? What are the outcomes of the engagement looking to achieve? What's negotiable? What information do we need to obtain from the community? So therefore, what questions do we need to ask? So therefore, what tools and techniques do we need to use? There's so much that needs to be unpacked in that defined step. And the more you do understand in that step, the less risks you'll have further down the track when you're delivering the engagement. So that the second step is understand, and that is about understanding the full picture of the community and their barriers to engagement. And we have a lot of sources of great social and demographic data as a starting point here in Australia, as I'm sure you do in North America. So we get information from community directories, census data. We have indexes that we use around social disadvantage. We look at reports from previous engagement, local governments, NGOs. So this information should give you a foundation to map stakeholders and understand their relationships to each other and the project, and also identify those barriers to engagement. The next step, designing and implementing, and that's about creating an engagement process for the whole community, which addresses those barriers to engagement. And our toolkit, again, provides an overview of barriers and those appropriate tools. But it's always important to have a suite of tools. I'm finding on any sort of local government project at the moment, we have between 8 and 15 different tools for people to contribute their input into the engagement process. But they have to be different mediums and modes and styles. They can't all be online. We mirror our online and face-to-face, so there's a balance there. And we're also finding that even when there's a whole series of choices online and face-to-face in engagement, in Australia at the moment, about 65% of people will choose to participate online, just because, you know, online engagement spaces are safe. They can access information. They're much more creative and engaging than they used to be, which is good. The fourth step there is capture. And this is about how we capture the experiences, the behaviours, the information that come out of the engagement activity or program. And again, quite often governments get sidetracked with, oh, what pretty or sexy new tool am I going to use to engage people? And then they're like, oh, okay, right, yeah, we need to actually get some information and do something with it. So whether it's capturing information using technology, so whether it's an app on your phone, or it's an iPad, or it's a low-tech option of writing things down, putting it up on a wall, getting people to do self-completion activities, taking photos, doing mapping, whatever it is, how you actually capture the sentiment of the community is really important. The fifth step is feedback, and we all know how important it is to close the loop on any engagement. We're using a lot of video at the moment to close the loop. It's watching a 5-minute video is much easier than reading a 30-page report for most people.
Yeah.
And then evaluation. So evaluation and lessons learned. It's the most common step to drop off any process, but it's so important for corporate or organisational knowledge, ongoing relationships, and improving practice. So that's 6 steps in the life cycle of an engagement process. Yeah, but we've got more information about that for each of those steps in our toolkit. So that's it.
So with
those questions.
Beautiful. Well, would that work? You know, the 6 phases work if you want to make within your organization inclusive engagement as business as usual. You know, so I can envision you sort of using the 6 steps in terms of designing a specific project.
Yeah.
But how does it work as well when you're sort of trying to think, how do we make community engagement in our organization or in our community business as usual? Or how does that get tweaked?
Yeah, I mean, look, whether it's an inclusive approach or it's not inclusive. So if it's not inclusive, you're probably you know, just waiting for people to come to you. It's the usual suspects. I think we're beyond that. I would hope if anyone is really passionate about engagement, they're always thinking about who else needs to be involved. But I've seen these 6 phases be published in frameworks for government. So they're using it to guide their officers in planning good engagement, comprehensive engagement. So, and also the engagement triangle I see pop up quite regularly in frameworks and policies now for about how organisations see engagement. So it's broader than just decision making.
What a fantastic affirmation, huh? So now is this time when we are really eager to hear from those of you on the line. If you had any, it might be a question for Amy, but it could also be, you know, some feedback and insight and aha that you had as you listened to the presentation. And if you could maybe type those into the chat box, then we'll have Duncan sort of start bringing some of those forward. And while we're waiting, I know some of you had sort of sent in some questions when you registered, and I wonder if while we're waiting for folks to log in with questions, we might want to start with one that someone sort of sent and shared when they were registering. And the one that I've just sort of picked here is, it seems that more and more we're dealing with groups and individuals who are strongly motivated by self-interest or by fear, which makes them adverse to change and adverse to collaboration. How do we achieve authentic, productive engagement when in the face of this? Which is part of what I'm hearing there, is like people are really polarized, or they're coming out with an agenda, right, to an engagement process.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, this comes to the heart of engagement, and so I suppose in any sort of facilitated process. So if it's like a group process, how do you work with people that may have a specific agenda or they're adverse to change? You know, it's how you create the space. You create the space for sharing, how you design the session. You know, there's a lot of the resources out there about designing sessions when you know you're going to have some really strong voices in the community, and also about the strength of your facilitator to make sure that everyone can be heard in the room as well. So that's at a very practical level. There are some people that you're never going to get to change, you know, to proactively participate in a positive way in your engagement process. They never will. And I think we just, you know, when we're doing the, when we're understanding who the community is, we need to understand where they're coming from, because they're also an important part of the community as well. So why do they have fear? What have they experienced in the past? They're never going to agree with the outcomes of the process. They will attack the process. And my people like that, I would always say, not that they're enemies, but keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And those people that are adverse to change, I keep quite close to me on the projects I'm working on. I'll go and have a cup of tea with them and have a chat to them. And, you know, they'll be very negative about everything. But someone is giving them time, someone is listening to them, because quite often the fear about change has been because something has happened to them in the past. Yeah, so coming back to respect, treating all people with respect. Social media is really, you know, there's always a lot of misinformation in social media, which is really problematic for engagement as well. It can stir up a lot of energy around projects where you may not want that energy, and you just need to be really clear on your protocols for social media, and can people post? Are you filtering? Are you, you know, how you manage that social media is really important.
Because that's the other whole layer of the conversation that's happening in the background, right?
Exactly.
While the face-to-face engagement might be happening. Well, we've got a question here from Scott. Scott says, how do you bring disparate groups together? Do we go get one group at a time, or do we group different groups to build community and engage them together? How do you make that assessment?
You do a bit of both. I've worked in local governments where they've said, we don't do group processes which bring different communities together. And it's like, what? You want to bring different types of people together. You want to create those linkages and connections. That's what people are looking for. But you also want to educate people that there are other views in the community. You know, knowledge sharing is really important. So you need to do a bit of both. Then, you know, a couple of weeks ago, we were working on an integrated transport strategy, and we had a group session with a group of Muslim women, because the Muslim women were not going to come to our bigger session. So we had a really focused conversation with them. We created that safe space. It was for sharing. So there are some groups where they will not feel comfortable participating with people that they don't know and potentially don't understand. And plus, you might want to go deeper and have small group engagement around one cohort or group there's going to be a familiarity there. They're going to be much more comfortable opening up. It won't take as much time in that small group setting.
Fantastic. Now we have a question from Lori. She said, how do we reach isolated people who can't get out either because of mobility issues or restrictions around rural transportation options? Any thoughts and ideas around what's worked well?
Well, we do. I've got information on both of those things in the both of those situations in the toolkit. People with a disability, like a mobility issue, you go to their house. You go to their house with someone that they trust. So it might be a social worker, a service provider, or a carer. So it's about accessing them through one of those networks. And so the most vulnerable people in Australia live in public housing, and they'll have multiple barriers to engagement, and a lot of them don't leave their house. We go to them and we sit with the social worker and we interview them. If they're in a rural area, it's about telephone. It's about online engagement. But a lot of people in rural areas, they don't have internet. So it's about old school, picking up a phone and saying, here I am. How are you? Let's have a chat. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. Jessica asks, working with some partners and funders, many times they're interested just in the numbers. Reminds me of the official, right? Just get me my 1,000. Do you have any approaches or techniques for moving past, base quantitative measures to more qualitative measures for reporting and then defending the time commitment around engagement?
It's such a journey for organisations to go on, because the numbers is just it's so old school. When we do engagement, quite often we're taking our organisations, we're working with our clients on that journey as well. So from the very first meeting, I'm using case studies of the 1,000 people with the same voice to the 50 people with 50 different voices. So it's about creating that awareness and that cultural change. But what we're also seeing is they're going, okay, we understand the 50 people with 50 different voices, but we want that, but we want the 1,000 people as well. So, and then it gets into a process of, how do you weight this? And do you weight this? So it's very challenging. It's small steps. It's building the capacity of the people that I'm working with along the way. There's no silver bullet to that at all, because it takes time. And from our experience, changing the culture around engagement and valuing voices and the qualitative as well, that change process is between sort of 3 to 5 years. To go from an organisation that's about numbers and that's it, to engagement is an ongoing dialogue, it's qualitative, it's all the voices, 3 to 5 years. So yeah, I don't have any silver bullets or any, sorry.
But even just appreciating it's a journey and looking for those opportunities to seed it, right? I think would probably be an important thing to remember. Yeah. So Carol asked us a question. What's the difference between community development, community engagement, and community mobilization?
Community development. Okay. So community engagement is that a rhetorical question, Carol? Do you know? I wonder if you actually know the answer and you're just testing me here in Australia at 6:56 a.m. So community engagement. With no coffee. There'll be coffee soon. I'm very excited about that. Community development, community mobilisation. Okay, community mobilisation. Community mobilisation comes from the community. So at the moment, I'm involved in my community about off-leash dog areas. We are mobilising because the local government has made all our parks on-leash areas. So we're mobilising as a group of energised and active community members around this issue. So we're mobilising. We've had our first meeting and we're rallying the troops. So there's energy and passion there. We're going to do something. Community development is when organisations provide communities with tools, resources, capacity building to identify where they want to go into the future and support them to do that. So community development is about that organisation stepping away at a certain point as well. So community development gives communities the tools to go where they want to go. And it's driven by them as well. And community engagement is about organisations going into a community and seeking out those views and opinions, or working with them around, working with the community around a specific initiative. So community engagement is led by a proponent. Community development is led by a proponent, but then handed over to the community to lead. Community mobilisation is led by the community.
Very good distinction. So I'm shocked at the time because we're coming to the end. There's one last question here. I know there's questions that we haven't yet gotten to, which we can certainly share with you if you like. But the last question here is, how do you balance that sense of fun with communicating the seriousness of a particular topic or issue?
Yeah, I mean, there are some conversations that can never be fun. We are going to acquire your house for the train line extension. That can never, ever be fun. That is so traumatic for everyone involved. But how can it be fun? How can it be fun? It's about the energy that you can have in a facilitated session. It doesn't all, the energy all doesn't have to be deep and heavy. And perhaps some of those, you know, more serious conversations, they're one-on-one, and a one-on-one conversation doesn't necessarily need to be fun. So it's about being mindful of when something is going to be fun and when it shouldn't be fun, because it's not. It's about a lightness of energy you bring to the room, because people are giving up their time to be there with you. It's, you know, so much about engagement is about emotional intelligence. And fun, because of a lot of the engagement we do is broad strategic engagement. We're not taking anyone's house. We're not going to rip up a road the next day. We can make it fun. We have the luxury of making it fun. At the pointy end of projects, when, you know, things are going to change for people, that's when there's definitely a serious note then. So it becomes more serious and respectful, meaningful, and giving people time and space. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, Amy, for someone who got up at the crack of dawn with 3 young kids and had no coffee, you are remarkably articulate and
the
have
sun is
really
not up
gifted
here.
us.
There's no sun. There's no sun yet. So, yeah.
You
anyway.
have just gifted us with so much wisdom, and we are so grateful. So I'm wanting to thank you on behalf of all of us and turn it over to my colleague Duncan, maybe to wrap us up.
Yeah, thanks, Sylvia. And thank you again, Amy, for this discussion. I think I speak for all of us when I say that this has been very, very informative and engaging. And many thanks to all of you in the audience for joining us. We really appreciate all your questions and comments that you provided during the session and during registration. It's really helped make this conversation more engaging. And we hope that you found something that you can take back to your own work. As promised, in a few days, we'll email you with the recording of this webinar, along with other material related to today's call. We also welcome your feedback on these calls, so please do email Tamarack to let us know how we're doing. Tamarack is hosting a series of masterclasses in Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, and Ottawa on adaptive leadership, featuring Collaboration for Impact's Liz Skelton. This intensive masterclass will equip you with the tools, processes, and most importantly, the leadership practice to make a real and meaningful change to your own collaborative initiative. You'll learn how to apply adaptive leadership principles and practices to your collaborative initiative while demonstrating its relevance and application to system, organizational, community, and personal challenges. You can follow the link on your screen for more information and to register to secure a spot at this learning event. And we also have a very special workshop that will be hosted by Tamarack's own Sylvia. On April 27th, Sylvia will be running a one-day workshop in St. Catharines, Ontario, entitled Building Authentic Engagement, leveraging the wisdom of content and context experts. In the discussion today around inclusive engagement, if the discussion today resonated with you, then you'll definitely want to check this one-day workshop out. Together, we'll explore the authentic engagement of citizen leaders, how it's nurtured, and why it's a strategy that a growing number of organizations and municipalities are embracing. You can follow the link on your screen for more information and to register. We also have a number of other exciting learning events being offered over the next few months, as well as free webinars like this one. To learn more about these learning opportunities, please visit our website at tamarackcommunity.ca. Thanks again, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day.